Is your training stopping you from building real skills? Well, recently, hundreds of athletes applied to be roasted by me on this channel, and most of them are making the same mistakes, meaning their training is just a complete waste of time instead of a vehicle for learning and bragging rights over their training partners. So today, I'm going to break down 3 videos and show you how to fix these common mistakes that you're likely making using techniques and concepts that I've used to generate results like these. This is our first video. We're going to be watching a passing segment from Mr. Vance. We're going to watch this passing section and then we'll see what Vance can do better in these sections. So whenever you're passing an open guard situation like this, you want to maintain good control over the longest end of the lever. And that means actually at the ankles. The reason why you want to do this is so that you can dance your legs around the outside of your training partner's feet and knees, because what we know about good guard play is that you want to have your feet and knees pointed towards your training partner at all times. And ideally, if you don't have inside position, you want to stop your training partner from flanking you by using outside position. And so if you're the passer here, like Vance is, you want to take grips on the ankles so that you can flank your training partner using a Toriando style of pass, or you can simply feed their feet into more advantageous positions for you, which he does do on the left-hand side here, but he just needs to make a little bit more emphasis of this so he can get better results. In terms of the split squatting here, the head is on the far shoulder. He's got that correct. The left hand is on the top of the quad. That's correct. The right arm needs to be draped over the back here of his training partner's shoulder blades, effectively taking away any attacks on his right arm. And this can actually minimize a lot of the threats that your training partner has for you. And he also needs to do a better job of pinning this right leg of his opponent down towards the mat. This stops things like inversions, and it also stops things that happen in a second here, like far side K-guard entanglements, like right here. You don't want to allow your opponent to keep you between their legs because it's going to stop you from moving side to side. And you're going to have to deal with this leg before you actually think about consolidating a pass. And so instead of backing away completely and alleviating the pressure here and alleviating the tension, what Vance could have done better is simply stay controlled over the ankles. When he feels his opponent's foot coming up through the gap here, grab onto that ankle, put that back in between the legs, sprawl this left leg out a little bit further so that the weight is dragging across his opponent's body and forcing him to go flat. And then he can start to consolidate down into a chest-to-chest half. And what we know about chest-to-chest half is that it's one of the best passing positions, especially if you're going against somebody. We know chest-to-chest half, especially if you're going against somebody who's really flexible and quite a good guard player. That seems to not matter when you're chest on chest and you're in a half guard situation. Half butterfly, obviously different. Z-guard, obviously different, but if you can consistently get towards half guard where their knee isn't involved and their hook isn't involved and your chest is touching their chest, you're in a pretty good spot to start to mount them. So it's recommended that you try and get there as much as possible. We see Vance ending up backing away, resetting, and again, he's grabbing towards the ankles here, but he's not really focusing on it that much. And then as he starts to try and step around his opponent's guard here by flanking him, the legs get in the way because he's not using V-grips down to push his partner's heels towards his butt, and he gets entangled within the legs. He does end up getting a breakthrough towards north-south. The only reason this happens is what I'm coaching him to do here is that he inevitably gets outside the line of his opponent's feet, which you can see here. His opponent's feet are starting to point towards the referee here in the blue shirt. Buries his head nicely underneath, and then starts to get towards a north-south pinning position. So although he was inevitably successful, could have been much more efficient along the way. So the core themes that Vance could have done better in this situation, you guys are probably making the same mistakes. Keep connected to your training partner's ankles so that you can dance around them and start to get outside the line of their knees and feet. And then you won't have to worry about situations where they're entrapping you between their legs, which is good for their guard play and bad for your guard passing. And the second most important thing here is that you're not resetting to neutral positions. You want to consistently pile pressure onto your training partner as much as you can and avoid resetting to neutral positions. And this usually comes from good posture, like we talked about with the split squat passing, and making sure that you understand what good posture actually is in the passing methodology that you're using is going to lead to significantly better results as we can see with Gordon's split squat passing and that sort of style. It's very, very effective at exhausting your training partner. Let's go to contestant number 2, Mr. Joseph. We're going to look at some half guard passing in this one. So what ends up happening here is his opponent dives on a guillotine from a double leg. He actually does a pretty decent job at staying calm in this situation, but we can clean up some passing stuff in half guard that happens straight afterwards. Now, you can't really see this, but this is where his left knee is. Now, whenever you're in a chest-to-chest half guard situation, like we were speaking about in the previous video, and the knee is outside the line of the hip and there's no butterfly hook involved, it is your primary concern to worry about what their leg between your legs is doing. So the bottom leg basically is what we call it. If you do not put, in this instance, Joseph's left knee into the pocket of his opponent's right hip, he's going to be able to use that leg to use knee elbow escapes or get to close guard. And if you're anything like the guys who applied to be roasted by these videos, you're going to spend a lot of time in close guard if you don't focus on that. That's typically what happens in white and blue belt tournaments. He's doing a good job at securing the underhook. Obviously, it came from an arming guillotine, but he's maintained it. So that's a passing point for Joseph. And then he started to bury in a really nice crossface here, connecting his hands nicely. So again, this left knee of his could be more accurately placed in the pocket of his opponent's hip. For the best results, you actually want to use what's called a universal starting position. And it's a hip position where your hips face towards your opponent. They're not square with the mat. The reason that we do this is it takes your knee off of the floor to prevent knee levers. And it also makes it a little bit more difficult as you walk your opponent's hips away for them to gain access to butterfly hooks and start to use things like knee elbow escapes because you're turning their hips away from where you're actually attacking them. And it's a really good thing to keep in mind when you're passing half guard. How can I turn my opponent's hips away from me so it makes it extremely difficult to escape? Because if you think about it, in your mind now, when you're in half guard, everything bad that happens to you happens when your opponent's facing you. Everything good that happens for you is when your opponent's facing away from you. So what Joseph wants to do here is start to continually walk his hips down and around the corner. He's got a crossface underhook, and as soon as he can get his knee to a position where he can high tripod, he should do so, making sure that he doesn't make the mistake of leaving that left knee behind again. If your left knee isn't in the pocket of the hip of your opponent in this situation, when you tripod up, they will be able to bring, in this instance, this right knee up through the gap, and then they will have a hook to be able to use for off-balancing or sumigashi or leg entries. Admittedly, it will be difficult with a crossface underhook, but you still don't want to get off-balanced, have to undo your grips and then reset back into a neutral position. So now he's kind of getting towards that hip position that we want to see. This is great. His opponent is locking a triangle, which you do not want to do. It will not help you whatsoever. And once you get to this situation where you've got an underhook, you don't really want to relinquish the underhook. Joseph does a good job here playing off the dilemma between pushing the knee through the gap and claiming the underhook. He already has an underhook. So in this specific situation, what I recommend, post your forehead on the mat so you've got a good level of base. Crossface and underhook have to be parallel, or your elbows have to be perpendicular, Elbows have to be perpendicular, so go to a nice wide base. So you've got 1 point of contact, 2 point, 3 point. You create like a nice little triangle that's very good for base. And then all he's going to do is pop his knee up through the gap and then slide it over the top of the hip here. There's no real need to use the hand in this situation because you will relinquish an underhook, which is actually much better. And then when you get into these situations where either you end up mounting them or you're in 3/4 mount, you don't have to deal with the elbow that gets inside your knee, which will help them in their escapes and stop you from progressing into your immediate attacks. And again, if we're thinking about things like immediate offense from passing or immediate offense from escaping pins, which you want to do, you want to narrow that gap as much as possible if you want disproportionate success versus going back to neutral territory. These are the things you have to think about. One common thing that I usually teach my students is that you want to mount people with underhooks so you don't run into these inevitable problems where your opponent can come out on scoops and you end up turning a mounting position, second best position in the sport, arguably tied first with the back, into a front headlock situation where he's wrapped up on a single leg and now you're defending rather than putting their elbows above their ears and strangling life out of them. Final contestant, Mr. Nicholas, and we're going to have a look again at some half guard passing that could have been done a little bit better. The reason why I want to show you guys a little bit of open guard and then half guard passing is out of all of these submissions, this was the biggest problem. The students who submitted their footage, you can, by the way, down below, submit your footage. There'll be a prompt through an email sequence that you can sign up to. The biggest problems that I saw was an inability to smoothly pass half guard and convert that into mount. And then the second biggest problem was dealing with open guard situations without getting swept. So what we see Nicholas do here as he starts to claim a half guard by dropping his left knee over the top of the bottom leg of the opponent, he does a really nice job at securing a crossface underhook along the way. And then he also does a good job with his left knee position at this moment. Now, what he wants to do here again is what we're talking about. And it's so important that your hips from this direction start to face into your training partner. While you have square hips, there's a big gap here that enables your training partner to start to create space for, in this instance, his right knee to come through the gap. And again, you don't want to be on hooks. You want to be on top of their legs, dominating their hips, rather than giving them abilities to start to sweep you or start to sumigashi or just basically change the position and force you to open up your grips to go to something new. The second thing that he needs to focus on addressing is not allowing his head to get stuffed underneath his opponent's left arm here. So if you weren't watching that, let's have a look. He's got great head position to begin this passing sequence, but then his opponent starts to come up and over the top, and this needs to be addressed. It's not the end of the world if your head gets stuffed underneath the armpit, but you would prefer pinning of the far shoulder over getting your head pinned underneath their shoulder. Reason being, like we were speaking about in the previous clip, you want to keep your opponent's shoulders flat on the mat, and you want to walk their hips away from where they're facing you. If their shoulders are pinned on the mat and their hips are facing away from you, they basically have very limited escaping opportunities and almost no offense. And you always want to think about jiu-jitsu in terms of giving them no opportunity to attack you back and very little opportunity to escape what you're doing to them. If you keep that in mind, you'll have much better success in your training and in your competing. Hair on the keyboard, disgusting. So once he fixes this issue, uses a good crossface, and he's got his hips turned down towards the side here, over towards where these guys are spectating, he won't have this issue of his opponent trying to heist. Now, Nicholas makes a mistake here by coming up to a standing position from a half guard position. Now, sometimes backtracking is a good idea. Like when you're in full mount and you need some points to win, throw your leg back into 3/4 mount and then simply pass again. That's a quite logical way to backtrack and then gain points as a result of putting yourself in a worse position and then back into a better position. The times that backtracking doesn't make sense is where you go from a great position to a neutral position like Nicholas just did. And so if we're thinking about this, it's much better off that you keep the crossface, you fight for underhooks, you turn the hips away in universal starting position, than it is coming up into a standing position, even if you have a good high step pass, and even if you think you're going to get better results doing that. Inevitably, he ends up coming back down into 3/4 mount anyhow, but in my opinion, could have easily done that while staying on the floor and mitigating a risk of getting entered into a rimiashi, reverse De La Riva inversions, De La Riva sweeps, tripod sweeps. None of those things exist if you stay in half guard, and then you open them up if you stand. So if you make that mistake, definitely start to think about staying in a half guard situation. You'll have a much better time passing the guard. So now he's reclaimed his crossface underhook. He's actually turning his hips somewhat in the right direction. Again, we're seeing this same mistake of relinquishing an underhook to try and push that knee up and through the gap, where it's rather unnecessary. If you get your forehead down towards the mat here, your hips have to come with you. They will get higher. Again, if you widen your elbows and keep a tripod at the very top here, you can start to free your knee without using your right hand in this situation. Now, again, this is a little bit different because it's a gi match. Yes, understandably, there is a lot more friction involved in trying to free your knee from this situation, but it still can be done. It's not the worst case scenario to start to use your hand in this situation to free your knee, but preferentially, you at least have a try at freeing your knee without using your hand. And then if you experience too much friction, sometimes in white belt and blue belt matches, you will experience somebody squeezing the life out of your leg. unaware that that's a very bad strategy and that it will be quite difficult to free your knee from this position. But if you bide your time, have a dig at putting that knee up through the middle, you would actually be surprised at how simple and how easy it can be. And you don't lose anything if that fails. If it fails, then by all means, in this situation, take this right arm, post or even grab the pants on top of the quadricep there, and then you can start to free your knee line. When they try and stop you by putting their hand on the front of your knee, you regain your underhook, you put your knee down to the mat, you high tripod up with cross-face underhook, and then you start to pass into mount. And that's generally one of the better ways to start to pass into mount from a half guard situation. So now hopefully you can see some of the same mistakes that you've been making in your training and your competing that will inevitably stop you from passing guards, smashing people, exhausting them in the process, pinning them, mounting them, and then strangling them for a finish. We all want more submissions in our matches, obviously. So now you know what it looks like to effectively pass open guard situations and half guard situations, preferably into mount in your training and your competition. The next thing you're going to need to know about is how to simplify the sport even further so that when you're learning these moves, you can focus on the concepts rather than just having that blank brain feeling that you always get in your training and competing that starts to give you hesitation and ultimately very poor competition results. So watch this video next and I'll take you through a step-by-step process to show you how to simplify the sport.